Rain hammered the tin roof of Daniel's porch as he returned from the hardware store, groceries weighing down his right hand. The air smelled of wet earth and cold metal, the kind of storm that seeps into bones. He was halfway to the door when a flicker of movement at the edge of his driveway caught his eye. A woman stood there, hunched against the wind, her hair plastered to her face. One arm was bound with a blood-soaked scarf, the crimson muted by rainwater. Beside her, 5 children clung to each other, thin, soaked through, clothes hanging in loose folds as if they'd been borrowed from strangers. Their eyes were wide, dark pools reflecting the porch light, and none of them made a sound. Daniel's first instinct was to keep walking. Strangers in the middle of nowhere meant trouble. But the smallest child shivered violently, and the tallest tried to pull him closer, the way a big tree shelters saplings from the wind. He glanced back at the woman. She was pale, her lips tinged blue, her shoulders trembling under the weight of exhaustion. There was a wariness in her gaze, but also something raw, pleading, without words. The storm groaned overhead. He could hear the rattle of rain on their thin clothes, the crunch of gravel under his boots as he stepped toward them. "You all right?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough over the wind. No one answered. The children's eyes darted between him and the woman, waiting for her cue. Daniel sighed, feeling that quiet, stubborn tug in his chest, the one that never let him walk away from a stray dog or a broken fence. "Come inside," he said quietly, motioning toward the house. "Before you freeze." The woman hesitated only a moment before nodding. And just like that, 6 soaked strangers stepped into his life, trailing rainwater across the porch and into the warmth. His small farmhouse had never felt so full. The kitchen, usually a quiet space with only the ticking clock for company, was alive with the sound of spoons clinking against bowls. The children sat at the table, shoulders hunched over their meals, devouring bread and soup as though the food might disappear if they looked away. Steam curled upward, blurring their gaunt faces for a moment before vanishing into the dim light. Daniel moved slowly, keeping the pot warm on the stove in case they wanted more, though, wanted, wasn't the right word. This was need, urgent and unashamed. The woman, who had said her name was Mara in a voice barely louder than the rain outside, sat at the far end of the table. She didn't eat much. Her eyes stayed on her children, following every movement of their hands and mouths, as if reassuring herself that they were truly there and truly fed. The fire in the wood stove crackled softly, fighting off the damp that clung to their clothes. Daniel noticed the limp when Mara shifted in her chair, the way she bit back a wince whenever she moved her injured arm. A purple bruise peeked from beneath her sleeve, and for a moment, he wondered how far down it went. But he didn't ask. Not tonight. After the bowls were empty, he rummaged through his closets for blankets, wool ones that smelled faintly of cedar, and spread them out on the floor in the living room. The kids huddled together under 2 thick layers, their breathing slow and heavy within minutes. Mara sat against the wall, knees drawn to her chest, her gaze fixed on the window where the rain still streaked down the glass. Daniel settled into his old armchair with a mug of tea, watching the rise and fall of their sleeping forms. He didn't know their story, not yet, but he knew one thing. The world must have been unbearably cruel to bring them here, on this night, in this condition. And for reasons he didn't understand, the thought of them leaving again made the house feel cold in a way the fire couldn't fix. Days blurred into weeks, each one reshaping Daniel's routines until the old patterns of his solitary life were unrecognizable. Mornings began with the sound of feet pattering across the floorboards, light ones, heavy ones, a mix of shuffles and skips. He learned which child preferred tea over milk, which one needed a little coaxing to eat, and which would snatch an extra biscuit when they thought no one was looking. The work never stopped. He found himself fixing lunches for school, patching knees in jeans with thread that didn't quite match, and spending late evenings at the kitchen table repairing worn shoes with scraps of leather. The farmhouse, once kept in immaculate quiet, now hummed with life, laughter spilling from one room, arguments over who got the last slice of pie in another. Mara spoke more now. At first, it was only in passing, a question about the weather, a soft thank you for the bread. But slowly, in the quiet moments when the children were busy, she began to share fragments of their past. She told him how her husband's cruelty had turned their home into a prison, how leaving had meant abandoning almost everything except each other. She didn't give details, and Daniel didn't press, but the weight in her voice said more than any story could. One evening, Daniel sat on the porch, repairing the splintered leg of a chair while the last streaks of sunset bled across the horizon. The eldest boy, Sam, wandered over, hands stuffed deep in his pockets. He stood there for a long while, scuffing his shoes against the floorboards, before finally asking, "Are we staying?" Daniel froze mid-stroke with the sandpaper. The question hung in the air, heavy with all the fears a child shouldn't have to carry. He looked at Sam, saw the way his small shoulders sagged under the weight of uncertainty. Setting down the sandpaper, Daniel gave a slow nod. "For as long as you need." The boy didn't smile, not exactly, but something in his posture changed. His shoulders eased, his eyes softened, and without another word, he turned and went back inside, leaving Daniel on the porch with a quiet, unshakable feeling that the question had been more than just about a place to sleep. Spring arrived gently that year, as if it, too, had decided the house had been through enough storms. The meadow behind the farmhouse shifted from brittle brown to lush green, dotted with bursts of wildflowers that seemed to sprout overnight. The air carried the sweet smell of thawed earth, and the sound of children's feet running through the grass became as much a part of Daniel's days as the creak of his porch steps. Mara's limp had all but faded, though she still favored her right leg when tired. She laughed more now, a soft, unguarded sound that hadn't existed when she first stepped onto his driveway. Sometimes Daniel caught her watching the children with a look that was equal parts relief and wonder, as if she still couldn't quite believe they were safe. The house, once marked by silence, now lived and breathed. There were damp socks drying by the stove, faint chalk drawings on the front steps, and mismatched mugs lined up along the counter after hot cocoa nights. Daniel found himself doing things without thinking, tying shoelaces, cutting sandwiches into halves, telling bedtime stories from books he hadn't touched in years. On a Sunday afternoon, they gathered beneath the big oak tree at the edge of the meadow. The branches swayed lazily in the warm breeze while they shared bread and jam from a jar Mara had made herself. The children sprawled across a patchwork of blankets, laughing over a game of tag that seemed to have no clear rules. Mara sat beside Daniel, her dress brushing his sleeve. She watched the children for a moment before turning to him. "You saved us, Daniel," she said, her voice soft but certain. He shook his head, looking out at the field where the kids darted between shadows and sunlight. "No," he said, a slow smile tugging at his mouth. "You saved me." For a moment, neither spoke. The breeze carried the smell of wildflowers, and the sound of the children's laughter rose into the branches. Daniel realized then that his life, once defined by stillness, had been rewritten by chaos, noise, and love, and he wouldn't have traded it for anything.